Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining. I'm Irene from Bay Wellness Coaching. As part of our Pride Month series, I'm going to be interviewing various LGBT people about their experiences. So today, I actually have Jessie on the call. Jessie is a biotech engineer and currently lives in Los Angeles, but has traveled all over the world from Central America, South America, Europe, Asia. I'm really interested and curious to hear how Jessie makes friends through traveling, logistics, coordinating, planning financially, and ways to stay safe while traveling. So, thanks again for being on the show today, Jessie. If you don't mind starting off, could you share a little bit of how you identify in terms of the LGBT spectrum?
Yeah, thanks, Irene. Hi. I identify as a queer woman and as Taiwanese American as well.
Gotcha. And so, like, at least in terms of your identity as a woman, like, how do you prepare for traveling? Like, I know a lot of people, especially solo women travelers, can be a little bit hesitant, like, traveling by themselves. Like, what do you do to prepare yourself while you're traveling internationally?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I would say there's definitely a process. I didn't one day just start traveling solo internationally. It was a kind of a 4-year process where I started traveling in the US alone and then slowly through like Western Europe and developed countries and then finally to developing countries. And definitely think that safety is a big issue for female travelers, especially solo female travelers, and also for queer people as well. Um, so that's definitely on the forefront of my mind when I'm traveling. And there's some things I can give some tips on safety, and then there are also definitely lots of resources and blogs and articles on safety traveling or safety tips while traveling as well.
Yeah, in terms of like some of your tips of like how you travel safely, like do you bring around like pepper spray? Like do you notify your friends before you travel to a new place? Like what do you actually do in terms of like the logistical and like the actual like things that you feel safe by doing?
Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned some of them. Some of the things I guess I can break it down to like before you leave for your trip, and then while you're on your trip. Some of the things before you get to your destination, having kind of sending an itinerary to your family or to your friend or your roommate, and have kind of regular contact with people so they know if anything goes wrong. You can also like register your trip through the U.S. State Department, the Smart Traveler program. Um, and then I always usually bring pepper spray as well. You can carry it in your checked baggage, but not on the carry-on. So I'll bring it in my checked baggage and then carry it at night. Things to do when you're in the country or abroad. Then there's certain tricks I learned. Like for example, um, at night, I tend to walk in the middle of the street, especially if it's a small city that I'm walking through, rather than on the sidewalk. There's less of a chance to get kidnapped. It's kind of what I've learned or heard. Um, some places also, you can read the blogs, but some places they say it's safer to use Uber rather than taxi. Um, and then I also usually have like a whistle in my backpack that I always carry around as well. Um, all this is kind of just to say, like, there are some tricks you can use, but also use a lot of common sense. And if there's any situations that seem, remotely suspicious or dangerous at all, then get out of there as soon as possible. Like, you don't want to be going down a dark alley. Or, for example, one time I was walking through a park, um, walking back from the grocery store. I cut through a park, and then I saw like a group of teenagers like making a fire. They had a fire on the floor and in the grass. So I immediately just walked away from that. Another time was I was again walking from the grocery store and I saw a man and woman like fighting over a backpack, and then the woman pulled out a knife. So I immediately left. So anytime you can just leave a dangerous situation, or if you feel that something's unsafe, the best way is to leave as soon as possible, um, and just not get into those kind of situations.
Yeah, those sound like situations you might even run into here in the US, but like at least here in the US, like, oh, if I see like an emergency, I could contact the local non-emergency police line, or I could contact the 911 line. And like we kind of already have cell phones and they could figure out generally where your location is, which I think part of it is like if you travel internationally, especially if you don't visit visit a country where you already speak the language, I think that could be pretty
Hmm.
difficult. Before visiting a country, do you try to like pick up different words? Like, how much planning do you do before you go to a different country? And maybe you could share some examples of places that you've been to.
Sure, yeah. Um, in terms of planning, I definitely tend to be more of a planner than the more spontaneous type. Um, and so before I go places I've kind of been to or um, in South America, like Colombia, Brazil, Peru, Bolivia, and then Western Europe, kind of Iceland, England, France, Denmark, and whatnot. And then Asia, mainly just Taiwan and China. Um, Most of my experience has been in Colombia and Taiwan because I stayed the longest there. Stayed about 3 months in Colombia in Medellin specifically, and then um, 3 months in Taiwan. So before I went to Colombia, I did speak Spanish. I learned in high school and then kind of taught myself after that for about 3 years after college. Um, so I did kind of have some of the language skills already, but Colombia also uses a very different kind of accent and different slang than I was used to. So when I first got there, it was really difficult to kind of understand people. But over time, I kind of picked up the language and the local um, slang. So before I'll go to a country, I will kind of read a lot of blogs or travel blogs for expats um, or kind of working nomads there. And from there, I'll kind of have an idea of where I want to go during the time I'm there, sites I want to see, or places I want to visit. And I usually will at least plan out the first 3 to 5 days, have my like hostel booked or Airbnb booked for the first 3 days or so, and have planned out my like public transportation and how I'm gonna get around for the first few days. But otherwise, yeah, I the rest of it I kind of just leave it up to just fate and kind of traveling around and how I meet people and where I want to go. Um, yeah, I don't plan it to like every hour, every single day.
Mhm. And you mentioned meeting people in other countries as well as staying in hostels. Like, how did you make friends in these different countries? Like, were you meeting a lot of other expats, or did you also get a chance to meet some local people? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I find that when I'm traveling, it's a lot easier to meet other travelers and other foreigners, just because your schedules kind of meet up better. Um, but yeah, definitely the things I've done to kind of meet other travelers and also locals are meeting people through the hostel. Like a lot of times I'll pick hostels that have group events, and that's a good way to meet other travelers. Um, Actually also use Tinder a lot. Not necessarily just for dates, but I'll post that I'm, looking for friends to go to Pride with, or friends to check out gay bars in the area. Um, and I definitely try to like vet people and talk with them for a while before I actually meet with them. But yeah, that's been a really good way for me to meet people as well. And then other times it's just meeting people while traveling. I've met like friends at a taco shop in Medellin. I've met people while like backpacking Machu Picchu, and they've become really good friends that afterwards. So yeah, you kind of meet people everywhere. But yeah, I would say hostels and kind of online apps are a good way to meet people.
And you mentioned going to Pride or gay bars in some other countries. Have you noticed much of a difference in kind of like the LGBT scene? Like, my understanding is mainly here in the US and a little bit in Asia, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experiences like traveling and meeting other LGBT people across the world.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed a difference in Pride. So I've been to Medellin Pride and then Taiwan Pride as well. Um, it seems like abroad that, well, I've also been to LA and San Francisco Pride, Oakland Pride on all those as well. So I've kind of noticed between the US prides and Pride abroad, Pride in San Francisco tends to be very commercialized. There's, mostly it's like companies that are marching or employees or parts of employees that are part of a company that are marching. And so there's a lot of money that, like, there are floats, there's music, they have money to buy speakers for their cars that they're driving through as well. So it's a very big ordeal, and they're very kind of commercialized. Whereas like abroad, it tends to be kind of more of a like grassroots, smaller march. And so there's, I guess the biggest difference is there isn't really as much music because you don't really have people carrying around speakers or floats. It's mostly just people marching or walking together, which is also fun. It's kind of a more community feel to it. And in Taiwan Pride, actually, it usually happens around Halloween, so it's really fun. People wear costumes, and it's fun to watch everyone wearing costumes. Um, and yeah, so that's kind of what I've noticed in terms of the prides. In terms of like queer culture, I've kind of noticed one thing I've noticed is maybe there aren't as many people who who are kind of gender non-binary or kind of gender queer, somewhere in the middle of the gender spectrum. Um, I think I've noticed, like, Irene's kind of mentioned this too, like that there are more words to kind of label people that are in the middle of the gender spectrum. Whereas abroad, I think it's very, I kind of see just a very like butch femme dichotomy. Um, and so in Taiwan, it's just very like there's the kind of the T and P gender presentations or personalities, which is just P is more femme and T's are more butch. In Colombia, I also feel it was kind of just very butch femme pairings. There aren't as many like butch and butch pairings or femme and femme pairings.
Gotcha. That's really awesome that you got to see a lot of different prides. You got to meet people who are LGBT in different parts of the world. That's pretty awesome. Like, do you have any more thoughts on kind of your travel philosophy and like really spending a lot of time in a given city and really getting to know it well? Or do you prefer kind of like traveling to as many places as possible and kind of experiencing everything?
Yeah. I tend to be kind of more of a low budget traveler, and I usually travel solo. Um, I'm not kind of on a shoestring budget necessarily, but lower budget. And I mostly stay in hostels, at friends' houses, um, maybe Airbnbs as well. And but a lot of times it's hostels sharing rooms with other travelers. And in terms of my like travel philosophy, I tend to do kind of what I call slow traveling, which is I try to spend more time in one city, at least 3 to 5 days, kind of getting to know a city before I kind of move on. Um, I like to be able to kind of see how locals live and understand a city, its culture, and its people, rather than just hopping around to a lot of different destinations. So, yeah, I encourage people to do that if possible, if you can spend more time in one city rather than moving around so often. You also spend more money when you're moving around a lot because you have to keep paying for transportation, also paying for new hostels and whatnot.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you have a specific way you budgeted for traveling or like how, and like kind of how long did you travel for like at for extended periods of time?
Yeah, that's a good question. The longest I traveled was about 6 months in one extended period, um, continuously. And so during those 6 months after grad school, I was in Colombia for 3 months and then went to Brazil for the 2016 Olympics and then went to Taiwan afterwards for another 3 months. Um, and then in terms of finances, I kind of lucky I did save up money before my trip, so I just used that. But I did kind of budget things. I would budget how much I could spend in a day, and then try to save costs where I could. In terms of rent, I was kind of renting a room in Colombia. In Medellin, I was renting a room shared with a Colombian, sharing an apartment. And in terms of food, I would try to cook at least one meal a day to save money. And then, yeah, I would kind of just set a maximum that I could spend every day.
Mhm. And before you travel to these places, are you already withdrawing money before you reach the new city? Or do you kind of show up and at the airport or train station, that's when you exchange money? Like, can you use your credit card? I know some places are super credit card friendly. Like when I was in Denmark and spending like a week in Copenhagen, like every place accepted credit card and it was really amazing. Like you didn't even have to withdraw any money to even exchange at all. And like some countries that's like really easy, but in some places like when I was in Amsterdam, if you're in like the more suburban areas, like they don't accept our credit cards like MasterCard or Visa.
Yeah.
Like they actually need you to use like a debit card of their own or pay in like cash. And it's just like, oh, that's actually surprising. Like how did you plan like the money that you're going to use before you arrived somewhere?
Yeah, yeah. I would say there's kind of like three methods you can have money or you can use money abroad. One, the method you mentioned is kind of just using credit cards. That works when you're in kind of very developed countries or Western Europe. And as much as possible, you like I encourage people to try to use their credit cards, especially if you have like credit cards that don't charge international fees, or like um, the Capital One Venture cards, or I have the Capital One Quicksilver card. So using credit cards are really great for that. If you're in a country that doesn't really accept credit cards, like Colombia, then it really accept a lot of credit cards. The second way would be kind of bringing kind of U.S. cash and then exchanging it at the airport or at a like a currency exchange. So I'll usually bring some money, some cash, like a couple $100, especially when I know it's an extended trip of several months. So what my technique is, I typically will exchange at least the first day of expenses at the airport, maybe about $100 US dollars, knowing that I'll probably eat some of the exchange costs, something around $7 to maybe $10. But at least I have a local currency or local money then. And then after the first few days, I'll go look for a currency exchange um, office where I get a better exchange rate, and then I'll exchange more money. The third way would be kind of getting money through ATMs. And so ATM, a lot of places charge like ATM fees, and so the best way for ATMs is to kind of withdraw the maximum you would need at one time, rather than withdrawing like small amounts many times because you get charged fees every time you withdraw money. Um, so there's kind of a balance. I kind of do like I kind of use each of those three options: the credit card, exchanging money, and withdrawing from the ATM. Um, I think there are things to consider, like when you're carrying a lot of US dollar in a in a country and abroad, that can be a safety issue. So I try not to carry too much money, or I split it up and so it's not all in one backpack or it's in different spots throughout my luggage and whatnot. In terms of ATM fees, there are also like the Charles Schwab debit card I've heard doesn't charge ATM fees or reimburses you for ATM fees. So that was one I was going to look into when we can start traveling.
Oh
I
yeah,
think
I think I've
they're
heard about that card. I actually haven't really used it myself, but that seems like something good to look into when we can start traveling again. Yeah, thanks again for joining. I guess my last question is kind of like what inspired you to start traveling and like build that confidence for you to travel solo as a woman and kind of explore LGBT culture abroad? Like, And then any other final thoughts you have around that?
Yeah. For myself, like my parents really like to travel, especially my mom. So since I was a little kid, my mom would take us traveling on family vacations a lot of times to Taiwan or to other Asian countries. So that's how I've kind of had that experience, and then over time it was just kind of um, I enjoyed kind of seeing other cultures and meeting other people and kind of connecting with people that I never thought I would ever have met in my life. I've definitely built a lot of really strong bonds and friendships with people all around the world. So it's been a very special experience, like traveling abroad and meeting people. Um, in terms of now with COVID, I guess I recommend doing road trips since kind of traveling via plane is not really recommended, especially with social distancing requirements. So yeah, road trips are really great with like your family or small groups. Um, and right now gas is really cheap, so that's a great way. And, and if you're traveling around the US, I recommend checking out the Queer Girl City Guide on Autostraddle. They'll have a guide. These guides are really great. So basically, every major city in the US and even abroad, they'll list out basically all the queer resources or things to check out. So they'll list out all the queer neighborhoods to check out, queer bookstores, coffee shops, all the bars that you should check out, and they have reviews of different bars. Um, and yeah, so that's a really great resource that I use a lot every time I travel abroad. I'll check out the city guide for each city.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks again for sharing those resources and joining us today. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe to see some of our next videos. Thanks again, Jesse, for joining and signing off all together now. Deep breath in, deep breath out. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Take care.